Hello, I'm John Siegenthaler. Once again, welcome to A Word on Words. Our guest is Bell Hooks. Welcome, Bell Hooks, to A Word on Words. This book is called All About Love, New Visions. It's your, as I count, 18th book. That is a high achievement to be an author with 18 books. And this one, about love, approaches the subject from a fascinating perspective. You say at the outset, maybe in the preface or the introduction, you say that as a small child, you knew love, and then somehow it was taken from you. You lost it. And in trying to rediscover it, you found it was terribly difficult to do. And that when you would talk to people later on, and I'm moving ahead now, when you would talk to people later on about your search for love, people would say, you know, you really need to see a therapist. But talk about, because you write about it so eloquently, talk about the need of children for love if they're going to have it throughout their lives.
Well, I start off this book saying that I felt as a child what it was like to be loved and to be recognized, and then I felt that love move away, particularly talking about my relationship with my father, which I think that lots of people feel that our intimate connections with our mothers remain forever, but many adults have talked with me now about their sense as children that they held their father's regard and love at a certain moment of time and then lost them. And I've been amazed at the number of people that have come up to me after reading the preface and said to me, that's exactly how I felt as a child, but I couldn't tell anyone, because we're not allowed to talk about not being loved in our culture. We're made to feel that everybody knows love. I mean, I talk in the book about all of these people who'll say, you know, my dad beat me or mom did this, but she really loved me. And a key chapter in the book is the chapter on children, where I'm saying that no, in fact, if we are being abused in any way, we are not being loved. That love is antithetical to abuse and to domination, and that marvelous moment for me in the book when I'm talking about what do we teach our children about love, what is the miseducation we give them. And part of the miseducation we give them is that you can violate someone and then say you love them. And I think as we ponder why we are raising a nation of violent children, we have to ponder that miseducation about the nature of love.
You recite that cliche of Papa with the strop or the switch, saying, you know, this is going to hurt you more than it's going to hurt me, or I'm really doing this for your own good. And then you sort of attack that thesis, saying, why, if that's the case, is that happening? It is an act of violence, not an act of love. And to put another coat on it really covers up the myth rather than exposing it.
Which doesn't mean to say that I'm not saying that discipline is important, because discipline is crucial to any true love. That we have boundaries, that we set boundaries. So that I think part of what's happened to us as a nation is we have confused discipline with a kind of blind obedience to authoritarianism, whether it's children to parents or us to a government or a nation that is acting in a way that is autocratic and wrong. So that the book doesn't just try to look at our personal relationship to love, but what's happening to us as a nation as we move away from the kind of ethic of love that many of us felt undergirded all the great social movements for social justice in our society.
You say that we really, as a nation and as a society, forgotten what it is to really love, to find true love, and that it's evident in our music. We used to sort of go, let's croon about the moon in June, in tune, and now we come up with lyrics from Tina Turner and others.
What's love got to do with it?
What's love got to do with it? That's right, and that the culture itself has hardened.
And especially the youth culture. I mean, one of the things that's so disturbing about gangster rap, and let me say that I'm not attacking all hip-hop, there are lots of forms of hip-hop, but in its most brutal forms, it's anti-erotic, it's anti-female, it's anti-life, it's a cult of death. And one of the passages that I quote often in this book is a passage from the Bible, from the book of John, that says, anyone who does not know love is still in death. And we're at risk at being a culture that cultivates this sort of worship of death. And it is fascinating to me that, when I think about the defining movement for social justice that we had in our culture that rocked the world, it was a civil rights movement. The fact is, there could be no end to apartheid in South Africa today had there not been a civil rights movement in the United States, whether we're talking about Aborigines in Australia or so many people around the world that look to the civil rights and freedom struggle here in the United States as emblematic of justice. But the heart of that movement was an ethics of love. When I began writing this book, I went back to Martin Luther King's Strength to Love, which was such a marvelous book. And he was one of the first leaders in our society to really talk about love not as a sentimental emotion. You know, many of my readers, my Bell Hooks readers who are used to the hard-hitting, social...
Feminist.
Exactly, have said to me, well, why love? And people have said to me, we hope we're not going to lose that, that biting intervention. And I said, but to talk about love and the relationship between love and ending domination, whether we're talking about racism, homophobia, class elitism, because a lot of the book talks about greed and how greed has made us less loving as a nation. I mean, why do we think welfare is bad? We should be triumphing as a nation that we have the resources at our disposal to provide for people in love.
You say there that we now embrace the reform of welfare, not on the basis that there was needed compassion. We use welfare abuse as the excuse to cover up the fact that we've lost our compassion for those who are have-nots.
Exactly. I mean, I have been so disturbed by seeing so many people of my generation who came out of radical thinking into a kind of thinking that says, we can't give to others. People only appreciate what they work for. Or there's a lack of compassion, a hardening of the heart. Marianne Williamson began to talk about that in her book, The Healing of America. I mean, it's this sense that the kind of love ethic, and I think people have to hear those two words in combination, love ethic, which means that it's the values. I mean, we talk about family values in this nation, but we don't talk about what are the values that underlie a love ethic, the sense of respect. I mean, I say to people, well, love has to do with respect. When we look at children, particularly the violence of children against children in our nation right now, part of what we're seeing is a lack of care, a lack of respect, a lack of understanding. We're seeing envy. I mean, envy is a crucial emotion connected to greed, and that you want to destroy what you envy. When you have a 10-year-old kid wanting to destroy another kid because that kid is more popular, or that is something deep and profound. That is a deep and profound lovelessness. And we can't just talk about it in relationship to what parents are doing. We have to talk about it in terms of what we have been saying as a nation, what matters to us as a nation.
You know, I knew that you had written previously to both feminist and themes and racial themes. And so it didn't surprise me to find in All About Love that you say gender has, and that concept that men look at love one way. that has really sort of inhibited our ability to meaningfully bring the search for love to an end as a society. Talk a little bit about that concept of the role that gender plays.
Well, just recently I was talking about love at the LA Public Library, and a man in the audience said that, growing up I wanted to be loving, but I had gotten the message that you could not be a man and be loving. So he wanted me to talk to him about how do men in our culture move into a space where they can have that healthy masculinity that is not the patriarchal dominating masculinity, but one that allows them to claim the space of their own hearts and their own need for love. And one of the major studies I think that feminism has brought forth is our emotional neglect of adolescent males. The idea that somehow when a boy starts turning 12 or 13, we suddenly decide he doesn't need affection anymore. If he wants to be aloof and not speak. One of the stories that I tell in the book and that I remember from my childhood, I have 5 sisters and 1 brother. And as my brother was getting, I guess, his patriarchal masculinity happening, he comes home from school one day and we're all sitting around in the living room and he races in because he's going to go out and be with his buddies. And he races past all of us and he goes to his room and he races back out and Mom stops him just as he's going to go out the door. And she says, "We need to start this over. When you come into this house and your sisters are here and I'm here, you greet us, you acknowledge us. And you go back and you do that over." And it was, for me, an incident that stayed in my mind that instead of allowing him to assert that kind of negative masculinity that says connection doesn't matter, intimacy doesn't matter, all that matters is my kind of homosocial bonding with my male buddies, I felt that she showed us, both her daughters, the respect that we should want to have in our relations with the male, including our brother, our father, and she enabled my brother to see that this connection is important to you. And I think that many men have been falsely led into thinking that love is not vital and important to them. And early on in the book, I talk about the fact that despite the fact that we live in a culture where we basically believe love is a woman's issue, but most of the books on love that have become, kind of our sort of archival texts, I think of the one I talk about and praise so much, is Eric Fromm's Art of Loving, that as a teenager, when I wanted to know what is love, I went to that book, and it's still to me a crucial book. But in general, we don't look to books by women. Women write romances. I joke in the book that if a woman had written The Bridges of Madison County, it would never have been
right.
a
It never
success.
would have been published.
Women would have said, "This is ridiculous."
That's right. This woman out here taking the initiative, first of all taking the photographs and then taking the initiative. Well, you also sort of give us a preface, just a glimpse. That's what you tell about the story of your brother and your sisters and your family. It would be impossible to tell this story without personalizing it in some ways, and still much of your writing seems to lean away from personalizing it. But you talk about the end of a 15-year relationship and how devastating it was, and how it set you on your own search to reevaluate your own life in light of the love you sought. You also write later on about romantic love and a relationship with a younger man. Very briefly again, just enough to whet the appetite and make the point. And then at another point, you talk, after quoting Saint Teresa of Avila, about spiritual love in a really beautiful way. I think that it is clear that this book, despite your efforts to depersonalize at times, is a very personal reflection of what you're about.
I thought it was a kind of combination of trying to share the personal, but also trying to say our personal attitudes about love are tied to our culture's politics, to what our nation tells us is important. That chapter on greed, where I talk about the fact that one of the wonderful aspects of love is giving. And that as we give to others, we grow in our capacity to connect. I mean, the first major chapter in the book says, how do we define love? How can we know love in a culture where most of us don't have a sense of what it is? In fact, the book is dedicated to my ex-boyfriend, the younger man that you just evoked, because we had these continual fights and are still having them after 8 years. We broke up 5 years ago, where we kept talking about, well, what is love? And it was clear that he felt often that he didn't know what I was talking about. And then I talked to other women who say the same thing about the partners in their lives, men who say, well, I don't know what love is. So I try
Which
to...
sort of echoes that idea that gender does make a difference in the way women look at love and men look at love.
Well, I think what most men feel, they're not looking at love at all. And so part of what the book tried to say is perhaps if we had common definitions, if we started out from a common point, I mean, what would it mean for us as a nation to start off feeling that love is important for males as much as it is for females? Because deeply embedded in our national psyche is an assumption that love can't be important to men. How will men go and fight wars if they are dedicated to love? And until we begin to recognize that love has to be essential to men if we're going to end sexism, if men are going to reclaim the spaces where they can be connected to their feelings, to their fathers, to their mothers in different kinds of ways. But partially the book says romantic love has been the myth that has, as the only love that really matters. It challenges that notion. That's one of the new visions, that it says the foundation of all our love, like the foundation of a house, there are certain principles that will make you have a sturdy house. And those principles are the same irrespective of the kind of house you're building. The same is true of love. And we have been a culture that has over-valorized romantic love, that no matter how horrible and miserable your life has been as a kid or as a teenager, someday you're going to find this love and it's going to come into your life and it's going to change all of that. And many of us found that that was not so. And I think a lot of men felt that one day they'll grow up and they'll be humanized by a woman or a partner giving them love, rather than thinking about what will it mean, what will it take for me to become a loving person? Well, I mean, I use a kind of M. Scott Peck, I love his work.
You quote him a number of times.
I know it probably offends a lot of people that this intellectual is quoting M. Scott Peck, but I felt that his books, I love mass literature. I love the fact that we can have books like The Road Less Traveled, like Thomas More's Care of the Soul, that reach out with broad intellectual concepts to a wide audience. And I particularly take his definition of love as the will to nurture one's own and another's spiritual growth, and link it to Eric Fromm saying, love is a combination of care, knowledge, responsibility, commitment, and trust. Because one of the things that's happened in our culture is we equate love primarily with care. And that's why we can say parents who brutally beat their kids but who still love them. Because I look at my own childhood and I say in the book again and again, my parents cared for me deeply. But they also wounded me in ways that were violating, wounded my spirit. And I think that I would be a different person today had they not given me care, because I've met lots of adults who didn't get care, but I did not feel loved.
You talk about how your family reacted, how your mother reacted. Again, just a glimpse. When you began to publicly discuss your own dysfunctional family, it was as if she didn't know what you were talking about.
Well, John, I told you when we were talking right before the show began that I see myself as a Southern writer. I see my sensibility as a Southern sensibility.
Yeah.
And we know one of the heart of the Southern sensibility is that if there's anything going wrong in your family life, you don't talk about it. You don't talk about it within the family,
right,
and you don't talk about it outside the family. So that part of what has been, for me, a radicalization of my being is trying to in a sense claim a new sense of a Southern sensibility, because I think that, you know, as I was going home from Nashville the other day to visit my folks in Kentucky, I saw a sign that said something about the New South, and I kept thinking that part of this a New South, because I think the South has a unique sensibility that, for me, informs my work. The civility, the courtesy, the kinds of things I evoke, the community that I write about in the book.
You write at length about the community and how you can't have love unless it goes beyond yourself and reaches out to a community at large.
And I write again and again that these were the lessons about love that I learned here in the South, in the Southern Black Baptist Church, that sense of what it is to care for the stranger, to move beyond yourself, all of those things. But I think it's a big challenge when it means us telling the stories that we've been told to keep secret. I mean, I like the chapter in the book on honesty that says, when are we going to face as a nation, and this goes back to our president, that we cannot be loving and tell lies. When I heard about Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky, the first thing I thought about is this man violated not just the codes of some kind of morality, but the idea of the trust and honesty that should have been essential to the fabric of his familial relationships, because his actions didn't just affect himself, and it affected his family. They must live with the burden and consequences of those actions.
You know, I hadn't thought of it until this minute when you brought up President Clinton and his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. But in a very real sense, the public, the national public's willingness to tolerate that and to forgive the
Absolutely,
lie really
John.
sort of makes your case that love is a lost value in a society that will embrace a liar and a cheater.
Especially imagine what would it have happened just imagine this scenario in our nation. What if this couple had come together on national TV and said, the essence of our marriage is honesty and communication. And whatever has taken place, it was discussed in the context of our marriage. I mean, that would have really rocked the foundation of everyone in our society, because it says that we all make mistakes and we all do things, and we're not all always faithful. But the key question in love
Now,
is...
did I just hear you put the burden on the woman?
Not at all. I meant that as a couple, I said, that they would come together as a couple and talk about the dynamics of their relationship, because I still am proud of the Clintons in terms of their relationship as a public couple. It's very hard to be a public person, you know that. I know that it's hard to be a public couple, but I felt let down by the fact that this woman that many of us looked forward to how she would progress in the White House, who was a woman of powerful voice, was suddenly silent, and she wasn't saying, we have a marriage and we have determined the terms on which we communicate, because the heart of love, too, that I talk about in the book is forgiveness. So
you certainly do. You say that it is, and it's part of that larger community. It's in that chapter when you talk about a larger community. Forgiveness is crucial.
Well, think about the fact that when Martin Luther King, talked about our nation's ending racism, he talked about forgiveness is crucial to how we as people of color, as black people in particular, have to extend to those who have wounded us compassion and forgiveness, or we always end up in the same violent place.
And that reminds me of what he said to white liberals. He said, those of you who are and aren't able to say so, in the end, we will liberate you, which was another act of love, not just to those who hated him, but those who supported him but couldn't tell him. In the few minutes that are left, let's focus on that chapter that deals with spiritual love.
Absolutely, because I think that our nation, after all we've said, John, I want to say, too, that our nation is yearning for love and community. That people want to know how we can live deeper and more meaningful lives. And the focus on the Dalai Lama, the focus on a Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, whom I quote a lot in the book, is we have been looking for those spiritual teachers in our life today who can help us return to love and community. And part of what is interesting about us as a country is that the vast majority of people in this country still say they're Christians, when we know one of the heartbeats of Christianity is the idea that God is love, that we are realized more fully as spiritual beings through love. So the question becomes, if we think this, if this is at the core of our beliefs, why are we not living it out in our actions? And that's a kind of political and spiritual question. Because I feel like we have to attend to the needs of the Spirit. And one of the things that I would say about the American left is that the American left has never been interested in talking to the needs of the Spirit.
Its rhetoric is not loving.
Exactly. And that's part of why the conservative right wing always reaches out more to masses of people, because it acknowledges emotional needs. It acknowledges the needs for family values.
I listen to you, and you're losing your reputation as a radical.
Well,
you're
see, I feel like I'm trying
to
make radicalism be true to the spirit of itself, which is, if you are thinking wrongly, that you have to be willing to change that thinking. I think the left has to begin to talk about love. I mean, was there any more radical movement in our country than civil rights, in the sense that, I mean, feminism is radical, but men and women have always lived together. The civil rights movement, the end of a certain kind of white supremacist apartheid, that was about love. And it changed us, and it changed us as a nation for the better. So I don't think that I'm, breaking with that tradition. I'm trying to re-evoke it, because by losing it, we are losing the kind of radical love of justice that has the potential to make this nation be a great nation always, and not be a nation that's false to its own values, false to that notion of really believing in freedom and justice. One of the things I say in the book is that there can be no love without justice.
There's a line in George Bernard Shaw, and I'll conclude with this. It says, "Must another Christ die in every generation to save those who have no imagination?" As you talk of love, you have great imagination, Bell Hooks.